What if I told you the fairy tale marriage that once captivated the world was never really about love? That's the chilling revelation now hanging in the air as Prince Harry, at the age of 41, begins to strip back the glittering curtain and expose the truth. A truth so raw, so unsettling, that it threatens to permanently stain his story, his family, and his future. Imagine the shock. The very woman who once promised to stand by him through thick and thin allegedly used him instead as a weapon, a pawn, a revenge tool aimed directly at the very institution that had raised him. Can you picture it? A young prince, burdened by grief, haunted by the legacy of a mother adored by millions, suddenly swept into a whirlwind romance that the world celebrated. But what if that whirlwind wasn't love at all? What if it was calculation, a master plan to harness Harry's deep wounds and turn them against the monarchy itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't just tabloid gossip. It's the confession of a man who now admits he was manipulated. And it begs the question, how long can a marriage survive when built not on trust, but on strategy? Harry, once the beloved people's prince, found himself reshaped into something entirely different. A rebel, an outcast, a man cut off from his own bloodline. But why? Because, he claims, Meghan Markle needed him to strike back. She needed his voice, his pain, his royal name, to wage a war that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with vengeance. But pause here for a moment. Think of the stakes. This isn't just a marital spat. This is history in the making. When a Windsor speaks, the world listens. And when one of them betrays the family, the echoes travel across centuries of tradition. Why now? Why at 41 does Harry decide to bear it all? Timing, my friends, is never accidental. Picture Harry staring at himself in the mirror, lines of exhaustion under his eyes, the weight of regret pressing heavily on his shoulders. He's no longer the boy we once pitied after Diana's funeral, no longer the cheeky soldier laughing with comrades. He's a man in crisis, a husband torn apart, a father questioning whether he's been safeguarding his children or sacrificing them in a war they never asked to fight. Ask yourself, when does loyalty to a spouse cross into betrayal of blood? When does silence become complicity? And more importantly, when does a prince stop being a symbol and start being just a man, broken, manipulated, and used? The tale of Harry and Meghan was once told as modern romance. Hollywood glamour met royal tradition. But behind palace gates, whispers already hinted at something darker. Meghan pushing Harry into interviews. Meghan encouraging memoirs like Spare. Meghan framing narratives in a way that embarrassed his family and broke centuries of discretion. At first, it looked like independence. But now, through Harry's confession, it looks like something else entirely, strategy. Do you remember that Oprah interview? The carefully framed lighting, the world holding its breath as Harry and Meghan told their truth? Now imagine hearing that even that wasn't organic, that every word was calculated to wound, every pause rehearsed, every revelation planted like a landmine in the monarchy's fragile soil. And Harry? He wasn't the general commanding the battlefield. He was the soldier sent to charge first, carrying the weight of someone else's agenda. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Harry admits he wasn't Meghan's first attempt at such a conquest. Other wealthy, high-status men had been courted before. They walked away. They sensed something. But Harry? Harry stayed. Why? Because perhaps, just perhaps, he was the perfect storm. A man already angry with the institution. A man already scarred. A man desperate to protect his wife, to prove he could be the opposite of the coldness that once destroyed his mother. And so, he became the perfect weapon, sharp, loyal, blind. Now ask yourself this. How do you admit to the world that the woman you married used you? That you built a life, had children, turned your back on your family, all for a cause that wasn't yours? That takes not only courage, but despair. It takes a man who has realized there is nothing left to lose. And the irony? Harry thought he was breaking free from a gilded cage. But in reality, he had stepped into another one. Only this time, Meghan held the key. The world always wondered why Harry looked so conflicted in public appearances. The subtle body language, the hand tightly gripped, the averted gaze, the nervous smiles. Was that love, or was that control? Was that partnership, or was it performance? And now, through his own words, we begin to see the cracks. Here's a thought. Revenge doesn't stop when the cameras turn off. It lives at the dinner table. It lingers in arguments. It gnaws at intimacy. And for Harry, revenge wasn't abstract. It was personal. Every sentence Meghan allegedly urged him to say felt like a knife into the memory of Diana, into the heart of his brother William, into the crown of his father Charles. Can you imagine the torment of being used to wound the people you love most? But the biggest question is this: why now? Why not years ago? Why at 41? Perhaps it's because the years have stripped away illusions. Age brings clarity. Maybe it's because the children are growing older, and Harry fears what they'll inherit. Not titles, but trauma. Or maybe, simply, because he realized he had become the very thing he once despised, a tool for someone else's power play. Whatever the reason, his revelation is seismic. It forces us to rethink every smile, every interview, every hand-holding photo op. Were we watching love, or were we watching a long game of vengeance unfold? And if Harry admits it now, what does that mean for the marriage? What does it mean for Meghan's future? For his children's titles? For the fragile relationship he might still cling to with his father and brother? These aren't just family matters. They are matters of state, of history, of legacy. Because let's be honest, when a royal divorces, the world doesn't just see broken vows. They see broken dynasties. And if Harry is saying that Meghan used him to strike back at the crown, then this isn't just a divorce. It's a betrayal that may scar the monarchy forever. And so, as we step into this story, we must prepare ourselves. It isn't just gossip. It's revelation. It's confession. It's the tearing down of illusions that once made us believe in fairy tales. But if you think this admission is shocking, wait until you hear what Harry revealed next, because what came after would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The silence broke not with a whisper, but with a tremor. At first, it sounded like the kind of offhand remark people shrug off. But then, as the words settled, the impact became clear. Prince Harry had finally said it. Meghan had used him, not as a husband, not even as a partner, but as a weapon. Think about that for a second. A weapon. Not a prince, not a man, but an instrument of revenge. The magnitude of such a confession isn't just personal, it's historic. When a Windsor speaks, the reverberations are global. And here was Harry, at 41, confessing that the woman he had chosen against the wishes of his family had not chosen him for love, but for utility, for payback. But how exactly did this confession emerge? It wasn't at a flashy interview or a stage documentary. No, this moment was quieter, heavier, almost reluctant. Those who heard him describe it said it wasn't anger that laced his voice, but exhaustion. Imagine a man who has been carrying someone else's war chest, finally realizing he's been marching under the wrong flag. Harry described how Meghan constantly pushed him into moments of exposure. Remember the Oprah interview? To the public, it looked like liberation. Harry and Meghan speaking their truth. But according to his admission, behind the scenes, it was pressure. Relentless pressure. Meghan telling him, "This is how we fight back. This is how we show them." Doesn't that sound less like partnership and more like recruitment? It didn't stop with Oprah. The memoir, Spare, was another battlefield. Meghan allegedly nudged, encouraged, even insisted on passages that she knew would sting his family most. His father's distance, William's arguments, Camilla's portrayal, it all seemed to bleed from wounds Harry carried. But now, in hindsight, Harry suggests those wounds weren't just his to share. They were strategically weaponized by Meghan to humiliate the monarchy. And the cost? The world saw Harry as bitter, ungrateful, even cruel. While Meghan sat beside him, appearing composed, Harry became the lightning rod. He was the one the tabloids shredded. He was the one blamed for betrayal. Isn't it ironic? The weapon always takes the blow first. But here's where the confession turns darker. Harry admitted that it wasn't only about the monarchy, it was about him, too. Meghan knew exactly how to play on his emotions. His unresolved grief for Diana. His resentment of the firm. His lifelong battle with feelings second to William. These weren't weaknesses in Harry's mind. They were scars. But to Meghan, they were leverage points. And Harry now realizes he let her pull those strings. What must it feel like to admit that? To look back and realize that some of your most vulnerable truths, your most intimate confessions, were not shared in the warmth of trust, but harvested for ammunition? Harry painted the picture of a man who woke up one day and realized he had become unrecognizable. The cheeky soldier who once served on the front lines, the compassionate young royal who walked through minefields in Africa like his mother before him. That man was gone. In his place stood a bitter spokesperson, constantly tearing down the very institution he once loved. And the realization hit him. Whose voice was he really echoing? His own? Or Meghan's? This is where the betrayal cuts deepest. Harry confessed that every time he opened his mouth, it wasn't entirely him speaking. It was Meghan's revenge flowing through him. He had become the megaphone for a war he never started. But let's pause and ask, how does a man like Harry, raised in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, adored by millions, trained to keep calm and carry on, end up here? Was he blind, or was he broken? Was Meghan simply clever, or was Harry tragically eager to be led? The moment of confession didn't answer all those questions, but it opened the floodgates. Harry, stripped of excuses, admitted something few men, let alone princes, could ever bear to say. He had been used. And in that admission, we see the depth of his despair. And yet, here's the twist. Harry said this not with venom, but with sorrow. He wasn't raging against Meghan. He was lamenting himself, as if to say, how did I let it come to this? That kind of reflection doesn't come from hate. It comes from a man who realizes he gave away his agency, piece by piece, until nothing remained. But this wasn't the full story. This was only the opening crack in the dam. Because as Harry continued, he revealed that Meghan's weaponization of him wasn't born out of their marriage. No, it had roots far deeper. Meghan, Harry confessed, had attempted similar maneuvers before. Harry wasn't the first target. He was simply the one who stayed. And that revelation, that Harry wasn't unique, but merely convenient, would shatter everything we thought we knew about their love story. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if every headline, every interview, every explosive revelation wasn't random at all, but part of a larger playbook? That's the chilling idea Prince Harry now lays bare. In his confession, he doesn't just admit to being used, he details the strategy. Meghan's strategy. And it was calculated with surgical precision. Think back to the beginning. Meghan arrives into the royal family, bright-eyed, glamorous, and smiling. She tells the world she's ready to serve, ready to modernize the monarchy. But behind closed doors, Harry now admits, she had another plan, revenge. Not just against the firm that she felt had mistreated her, but against the very institution she believed had wronged her personally. And Harry? He became her sharpest weapon. Consider the interviews. To the casual viewer, they looked like spontaneous moments of courage. Harry and Meghan sitting opposite Oprah, eyes wide, voices steady, claiming they were finally free to tell their truth. But according to Harry's confession, it wasn't organic. It was rehearsed, scripted. Every phrase weighed for maximum damage. Meghan, Harry recalls, would walk him through talking points. What stories to share? What accusations to highlight? Which silences would sting the most? Doesn't that sound less like healing and more like strategy? Harry admits that at first, he thought he was protecting Meghan, that by speaking, by standing beside her, he was shielding her from cruelty. But over time, he realized that he wasn't protecting her at all. He was protecting her narrative. A narrative carefully crafted to embarrass the monarchy, weaken its grip, and elevate Meghan as the woman who stood up to the crown. And the memoir? Spare. To the public, it was Harry's chance to tell his story. But in Harry's own words, it wasn't fully his story. It was hers, too. Meghan allegedly urged him to include moments that would sting. His father's coldness, William's temper, Camilla's villain role. She knew these revelations would ripple through the palace walls like grenades. And Harry, blinded by love, or perhaps by obligation, agreed. He carried the weapon. He pulled the pin. But here's where the story turns darker. Harry recalls how Meghan framed every family feud as evidence of systemic cruelty. Every slight became oppression. Every disagreement became proof of racism or exclusion. And Harry, already raw with grief and resentment, swallowed those interpretations whole. It wasn't just her words he carried, it was her lens. She turned his pain into propaganda. Ask yourself, what's more dangerous? A man angry at his family, or a man convinced his anger is righteous? That's what Meghan allegedly gave Harry, the conviction that every attack was justified, every betrayal deserved. She turned his wounds into war cries. And yet, here lies the cruelest twist. Harry now sees that while Meghan pushed him into battle, she rarely risked herself. She positioned him front and center, the grieving son, the bitter brother, the rebel prince. It was his face on the cover of Spare, his voice trembling during interviews, his childhood, his trauma, his family torn apart in public. Meghan remained steady, often silent, watching as Harry absorbed the blows. Isn't it ironic? The weapon was never meant to be her, it was always him. But why Harry? Why not someone else? According to his own admission, Meghan had tried before. Wealthy men, high-status figures. She courted them, tested the waters, but they walked away. They sensed the danger. Harry, however, was different. Vulnerable, hungry for love, burdened with grief. He wasn't just a prince, he was the perfect storm. And Meghan exploited it. Harry recalls how she would tell him, "This is bigger than us." At the time, he believed her. He thought he was part of a cause, that their marriage was a crusade for justice. But now, he sees it differently. It wasn't about justice. It was about vengeance. Against the palace. Against the crown. Against anyone who had ever doubted or dismissed her. But let's not forget the irony. Every move Meghan made to hurt the monarchy came at Harry's expense. He was the one exiled. He was the one estranged from his brother. He was the one mocked in the press. Meghan's reputation suffered, yes, but Harry's legacy was shredded. So ask yourself, what's worse? Being betrayed by your wife? Or realizing you were never her partner, only her pawn? And yet, this isn't the end of the story. Because Harry's confession reveals that this strategy, the weaponization of his voice, wasn't born in the marriage. It started before. Meghan had already been searching for the right target. And while others escaped, Harry stayed. Which raises the most chilling question of all. If Harry wasn't the first target, who was? And what made him so easy to keep? The answer lies in Meghan's past. A past filled with attempts at power, status, and influence. And Harry's confession forces us to look back at that history with new, unsettling eyes. Because what Harry revealed next wasn't just about him. It was about the men who came before. And why every one of them walked away, except him. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine realizing you weren't the first. That the woman you thought chose you for love had, in fact, tried before, with others. That is the next layer of Harry's confession, and it cuts deeper than many expected. Because in his own words, Harry wasn't Meghan's first target. He was the one who stayed. Think about that for a moment. All the romantic stories, the royal wedding, the fairy tale narrative, it all rests on the idea that Harry was the one. But what if, in reality, he was just the one who didn't leave? That flips the entire story on its head. Harry admits that Meghan had pursued other wealthy, high-status men before him. Businessmen, actors, even men with aristocratic ties. Men who had what Meghan wanted. Influence, money, visibility, power. They weren't short-term flings. These were attempts at climbing a ladder. But here's the catch. They saw through her. They walked away. Let's paint the picture. Meghan wasn't unknown in Hollywood before Harry. She had a role in Suits, attended high-profile parties, mingled with social circles that orbited wealth. It wasn't just chance encounters. Meghan was deliberate, always networking, always seeking the next connection. Harry, in his confession, paints these pursuits not as accidents of romance, but as attempts at acquisition. And here's where the irony bites. Those other men recognized the pattern. They realized they were being pursued for what they represented, not who they were. So they pulled away. Meghan, undeterred, kept looking. Until Harry. Now, why Harry? Why did he stay when others walked? Harry himself provides the answer, and it's devastating. Vulnerability, grief, loneliness. He was the perfect storm of emotional availability and royal stature. Meghan didn't just see a prince. She saw a man desperate to be loved, desperate to protect, desperate to prove he wasn't the cold, disconnected royal the world thought him to be. Ask yourself, haven't we all known someone who clings harder because they're afraid of loss? That was Harry. He wasn't cautious. He didn't see the red flags. He ignored the whispers. Because to him, Meghan wasn't just another relationship, she was a lifeline. And this is where the tragedy deepens. Harry now admits that the very things that made him human, his pain, his scars, his need for belonging, were the same things that made him susceptible. He didn't see Meghan's pursuit as strategy, he saw it as fate. He believed he had found someone who finally understood him. But in reality, he had found someone who knew how to use his wounds as an entry point. Think of the cruel irony. Men richer, more powerful, more experienced in navigating manipulation, walked away. But Harry, the one who should have been most guarded, was the one who stayed. And because of that, he became not just a husband, but the ultimate prize. A royal name, a ticket into history, a weapon to be wielded. But here's the part that unsettles Harry most. Looking back, he realizes Meghan wasn't subtle. The signs were there. The ambition, the relentless push for higher circles, the careful way she placed herself in front of cameras, the timing of her moves. Others saw it. They backed out. Why didn't he? And that's the confession that burns. Harry admits that part of him didn't want to see it, that he needed Meghan to be real, to be genuine, to be love. Because if she wasn't, then what was left? A man alone again. A boy still grieving Diana. A soldier with no cause. He chose blindness over loneliness, and paid the price. Isn't that the cruelest twist of all? That love, or what looked like love, was never really love at all. And yet, Harry's words reveal something else. An anger not just at Meghan, but at himself. For ignoring the warnings. For brushing off friends who questioned the pace. For distancing himself from William when his brother raised concerns. For believing that Meghan's pursuit of him was destiny, when in fact, it was persistence. Now the audience is left with the question, was Meghan's pursuit of Harry the culmination of her ambition, or the moment her revenge plot finally found the perfect host? Harry doesn't give all the answers yet, but he admits one thing clearly. Had he not stayed, had he walked away like the others, the course of royal history would be very different. The monarchy would still be bruised, yes, but it wouldn't be scarred by his betrayal. And that realization leads directly to the next, most painful chapter. Because if Meghan had pursued others before, and Harry stayed, then the question becomes, what did she do once she had him? How did she mold him into the weapon she needed? The answer is brutal. It's about strategy, manipulation, and the deliberate tearing apart of a family. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started as whispers, then arguments, and finally, a fracture so wide it threatened to split the monarchy in two. By the time Harry realized what was happening, the rift between him and his family was no longer just a private feud. It was a global spectacle. And at the center of it, according to his confession, was Meghan's guiding hand. Think back to the early cracks. At first, Harry insisted he and Meghan only wanted space, privacy, freedom from relentless media. Who could argue with that? The world sympathized. But then came the interviews, the documentaries, the memoir. Privacy transformed into performance. Silence turned into strategy. And every move, Harry admits now, drove a deeper wedge between him and the royal family. Do you remember the Oprah interview? For most of us, it was an evening of jaw-dropping revelations. For the palace, it was an earthquake. Allegations of racism, mental health struggles, betrayal from within the family, all aired out under the Californian sun. But here's what Harry confesses now. None of it was spontaneous. Meghan, he says, framed the entire thing as their chance to strike back. Strike back at what? At the firm. At the family. At the legacy Harry had been born into. And Harry, haunted by his mother's treatment, desperate to protect Meghan, complied. He believed he was shielding her. In truth, he was cutting himself off from the only family he had left. From there, the Netflix deal followed. A 6-part docuseries promising to show the Sussexes' side of the story. But Harry admits the editing was ruthless. Happy moments trimmed. Sadness highlighted. Family tensions magnified. Meghan, he claims, insisted the narrative lean into pain. People don't remember harmony, she allegedly told him. They remember conflict. Ask yourself, what happens to a man when his own memories are weaponized for someone else's agenda? Then came the memoir, Spare. Intimate details about fights with William, private conversations with Charles, humiliating anecdotes about losing his virginity or drug use. To the world, it was sensational reading. To the family, it was betrayal. But Harry now says much of what he revealed wasn't simply catharsis. It was insistence. Meghan urged him on. Tell them everything. Make them understand. But who was really meant to understand? The world or Meghan herself? The irony? For every revelation, Harry was the one condemned. The world mocked him. The British press labeled him bitter. Even Hollywood elites began to cool on the couple. Yet Meghan's narrative remained intact. The outsider who dared to challenge the monarchy. And Harry? He was the weapon taking the blows. But here's where it gets darker. Behind closed doors, Harry describes the arguments with his family intensifying. William begging him to stop, Charles pleading for discretion, even Camilla attempting to broker peace. But Meghan, Harry says, urged the opposite. They'll never respect you if you're silent, she told him. They only listen when you make them hurt. That's not reconciliation. That's escalation. And escalate it did. By the time the Queen's funeral came, Harry was already estranged, walking in processions with his brother, but unable to look him in the eye. Meghan, cool and composed, watched as the world speculated on the collapse of one of the most famous sibling bonds in history. Was it coincidence or part of the plan? But perhaps the cruelest part of all is the irony. Harry thought he was fighting for Meghan, that by speaking out, he was shielding her from the same coldness that once consumed his mother. Yet, in his confession, Harry admits he now sees he wasn't protecting Meghan at all. He was attacking his family. And every attack brought him closer to losing the one thing Diana had wanted most for her boys: unity. And what of Meghan's role in the rift? Harry doesn't mince words. He says she encouraged, even celebrated, the chaos. Every front-page scandal, every outraged headline, every awkward family gathering, they were proof to her that the crown was bleeding. Proof that her revenge was working. Ask yourself, what kind of marriage thrives on division? What kind of love story grows stronger as family ties are torn apart? For Harry, the answer is devastating. His love for Meghan became the very tool used to dismantle his love for his family. And so, the rift deepened. From gentle disagreements to explosive public warfare, the Sussex saga wasn't just about independence. It was about separation, isolation, transformation. Harry, once the cheeky, beloved prince, became the estranged son, the bitter brother, the weaponized husband. But the rift didn't just break the family. It broke something even more sacred, Diana's legacy. And that, Harry admits, may be the deepest cut of all. Because what came next wasn't just about revenge against the crown. It was about Meghan allegedly using Diana's memory as fuel, and that revelation would pierce Harry's heart like nothing before. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Would Princess Diana have approved? That question alone is enough to silence even the loudest room. It is the ghost that haunts every move Prince Harry makes, the unspoken benchmark for his choices, the compass by which the public measures his actions. And now, at 41, Harry admits the unthinkable, that Meghan, the woman he thought would honor Diana's memory, instead twisted it into her sharpest weapon. From the beginning, Meghan knew Diana was Harry's softest spot, the tragic mother he lost too young, the icon of compassion, beauty, and rebellion against the royal machine. Diana wasn't just Harry's mother. She was his shield, his reason, his excuse. Meghan understood this. She studied it. And Harry now confesses she used it. Think about it. How many times did Meghan's narrative echo Diana's? Paparazzi harassment, mental health struggles, feeling unsupported by the firm. It wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Meghan framed herself as the new Diana, the brave outsider persecuted by a cruel monarchy. And Harry, blinded by his longing to protect his mother's legacy, became her fiercest defender. Ask yourself, if the world is told someone is the new Diana, what does that do to a grieving son? It hooks him. It convinces him he's fulfilling his destiny. It blinds him to contradictions. Harry admits that every time Meghan evoked Diana's story, sometimes subtly, sometimes bluntly, he felt obligated to fight harder, shout louder, cut deeper. Because to him, protecting Meghan became synonymous with protecting Diana's memory. But here's the cruel irony. In defending Meghan, Harry ended up betraying Diana. How? By turning her name into ammunition against the family she once loved. Diana had her battles, yes, but she never wanted her sons to be divided. She never wanted them used as pawns in someone else's revenge. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Harry now says he sees it clearly. Meghan leveraged his grief as a weapon. Your mother wouldn't want this for you, she would say. Or, Diana wouldn't have stayed silent. Each phrase struck like lightning. How could Harry resist? He couldn't argue with his dead mother's ghost. So he complied, again and again, until his voice wasn't his own. It was Meghan's narrative spoken through Diana's name. Isn't that the most cutting betrayal? To realize the woman you love used the memory of the woman you lost to control you? Consider the interviews, the Netflix docuseries, the memoir. Diana's shadow looms over all of them. Harry invoked her constantly. Meghan, too. Not as inspiration, but as justification. Why attack Charles? Because Diana was mistreated. Why accuse William? Because Diana suffered alone. Why humiliate the monarchy? Because Diana had warned the world it was broken. And each time, the press ran with it. Meghan and Harry, the heirs to Diana's battle. The headlines sold. The wounds deepened. But here's where it twists further. Meghan wasn't just using Diana to manipulate Harry. She was using Diana to manipulate the world. To cast herself as a victim worthy of sympathy, admiration, protection. She wore Diana's jewelry. She echoed Diana's speeches. She even recreated Diana's fashion moments, from outfits to settings, knowing the cameras would spot the parallels. It wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. And Harry? He admits he thought it was beautiful at first, a way of honoring his mother. But now he sees it for what it was, branding, a strategy. Meghan making herself inseparable from Diana in the public imagination. And him, the loyal son who would never dare question it. But what happens when your mother's memory becomes a marketing tool? When the woman you love turns the woman you lost into a weapon? For Harry, the realization was devastating. It wasn't just betrayal of him, it was betrayal of Diana. Because let's not forget, Diana wanted peace for her boys. She wanted William and Harry united. She wanted them protected, even from the crown itself. But Meghan's strategy tore that apart. The brothers split. The family fractured. Diana's name dragged into battle. Her legacy twisted into justification for revenge. And Harry, the boy who once followed his mother's coffin through London streets, became the man who weaponized her memory against his own bloodline. Isn't that the cruelest irony? Harry admits that this was one of the deepest breaking points. That the moment he realized Diana's memory was no longer sacred but strategic was the moment he began to see his marriage differently. Because what kind of love asks you to betray your mother's legacy? What kind of devotion demands you turn grief into a weapon? The confession leaves us with a chilling question. Was Diana ever truly honored in Harry and Meghan's marriage? Or was she exploited from the start? And if Meghan could turn Diana into a weapon, what else was she capable of turning against Harry and his family? The answer, Harry reveals, lies in what he calls the revenge agenda. A master plan not just to hurt the monarchy, but to dismantle it, piece by piece, using him as the wrecking ball. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't even emotional in the way Harry once believed. What Harry now admits is chilling. Meghan had an agenda. Not just survival. Not just independence. Revenge. Cold, calculated revenge against the monarchy. And Harry was the perfect vehicle to deliver it. Think of the monarchy as a fortress. For centuries it has weathered wars, scandals, divorces, even abdications. But what if someone could find a weak spot in the walls? What if they could plant explosives from the inside? That's exactly how Harry now describes his marriage. He wasn't just a partner, he was the Trojan horse. From day one, Meghan understood Harry's vulnerabilities. His grief for Diana, his resentment of William, his fractured relationship with Charles, his hatred of the press. Each wound was mapped, studied, and, Harry says, eventually exploited. To Meghan, these weren't scars to be healed, they were tools. Pressure points. Levers she could pull to turn Harry's pain into power. And so began what Harry calls the revenge agenda. First came the Oprah interview. Meghan's narrative wasn't simply about her struggles. It was framed to shame the monarchy. Harry recalls how she encouraged him to share not just their hardships, but his family's flaws. Every revelation was designed not merely to inform, but to injure. They need to feel it, Meghan allegedly told him. They need to know what they did. Then came Netflix. Meghan allegedly pushed for footage that painted her as the Diana figure, the misunderstood outsider. And the rest of the royals as cold, heartless aristocrats. Happy family moments with William? Cut. Private reconciliations with Charles? Omitted. Instead, the series leaned into division, portraying Meghan as the brave truth-teller and Harry as her loyal knight. But behind the scenes, Harry admits, he felt like the knight carrying out someone else's battle orders. And then came Spare, the ultimate weapon. A book so explosive it scorched centuries of royal discretion. Private rows, humiliating anecdotes, family secrets, all laid bare. But Harry now confesses that much of what made the book sting wasn't his idea. Meghan urged him to dig deeper, to reveal more. Don't hold back, she allegedly told him. The world needs to see them for who they are. Ask yourself, was this catharsis or was it war? Harry's confession makes it clear, this wasn't about healing. It was about hurting, about dismantling, about making the monarchy bleed publicly in ways it had never bled before. And he, blinded by loyalty to Meghan, believed he was fighting for justice when in fact, he was fueling her revenge. But what drove Meghan's revenge? Harry says it wasn't just about racism, tabloids, or isolation, though those were her public talking points. The deeper motivation, he believes, was humiliation. Meghan felt rejected, dismissed, controlled. She had entered the monarchy expecting to be celebrated, perhaps even adored. Instead, she was criticized, compared, confined. To her, that wasn't just unfair, it was insulting. And Meghan doesn't forgive insults. She avenges them. Harry now admits that Meghan saw every interview, every deal, every headline as payback. Each revelation wasn't just about telling her truth. It was about punishing the crown for ever making her feel small. And who better to deliver that punishment than Diana's son, the prince with the most sympathy, the man willing to burn bridges in her name. But here's the devastating irony. The monarchy survived. It always does. Charles remains king. William prepares to be king. The institution moves forward. Who didn't survive intact? Harry. He lost his brother. He lost his father's trust. He lost the respect of millions who once adored him. Meghan's revenge wounded the crown, yes, but it destroyed Harry. And this is the moment where Harry's confession becomes most haunting. He realizes that while Meghan's agenda was always revenge, his role in it was sacrifice. He wasn't the co-author of this war. He was the offering. Think about it. Every attack elevated Meghan's brand. Every scandal gave her headlines. Every revelation made her the victim who fought back. But Harry? He became the bitter prince, the traitor's son, the man the world pitted at best and mocked at worst. He was no longer the cheeky soldier, the compassionate royal. He was the weapon, and weapons, once fired, are discarded. Isn't that the cruelest twist? That the man who thought he was fighting for love now realizes he was simply fighting for someone else's vengeance? But the story doesn't end there. Because Harry's confession reveals that while Meghan's agenda was public revenge, the cost at home was even greater. Behind closed doors, the marriage was crumbling. Harry, exhausted, isolated, and humiliated, began to see what he had become. Not a husband, not even a partner, but a pawn. And it was in those private regrets, behind the cameras, that Harry's breaking point began to form. Because what came next wasn't just about revenge against the crown. It was about the toll that agenda took on Harry himself, his identity, his sanity, his family life. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For the world, it looked like Harry and Meghan were thriving. Deals with Netflix, book sales, red carpets, interviews. But behind those carefully staged smiles, Harry confesses there was something darker brewing. Regret. Heavy, suffocating regret. The kind that doesn't announce itself in public, but gnaws at you in silence. Harry admits that every time he sat in front of a camera, his heart told him something different than his mouth. He would smile, speak his lines, defend Meghan fiercely. But the second the cameras switched off, he felt hollow, empty, used. And in those moments of stillness, when the applause stopped and the lights dimmed, regret whispered, "What have you done?" Let's pause here. Imagine being Harry. Every word you spoke brought headlines. Every headline hurt your family, and every hurt was permanent. How does a man live with that? He doesn't, not easily. Harry confesses he began to replay those moments in his head like a bad dream he couldn't wake from. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, Spare. Each one felt triumphant when it aired, but in the quiet aftermath, they became weights around his neck. And the cruel irony? Meghan seemed energized by the chaos. Harry, however, was drained. He began to dread the very exposure that Meghan pushed for. When producers called, Meghan would light up. Harry, inside, felt sick. Why are we doing this again, he would think. But the momentum was too strong. The revenge agenda had become a machine, and he was its engine. Here's where the regret turned into consequences. Harry recalls moments of family milestones, birthdays, funerals, holidays, when he wanted desperately to be with his brother, his father, his cousins. But he couldn't. He had burned those bridges. He remembers walking behind the Queen's coffin, shoulder to shoulder with William, but worlds apart. That silence between them wasn't just awkward, it was grief piled on grief. His actions had made reconciliation almost impossible, and the public saw it. The boy once adored for his cheeky smile, the soldier who served bravely, the prince who carried Diana's legacy. He had become something else. Tabloids mocked him. Late-night hosts turned him into a punchline. Even fans who once cried at his wedding now rolled their eyes at his interviews. His reputation, once untouchable, was shredded. But regret wasn't just external. It was intimate. Harry admits the toll seeped into his marriage. He and Meghan fought. Often, the pressure of being public warriors for revenge was exhausting. Harry wanted peace, quiet, family. Meghan wanted the fight to continue. Every disagreement widened the chasm. Harry describes nights of shouting, followed by cold silences. Days where he questioned whether his children would one day hate him for the choices he'd made. Ask yourself, what's worse, being hated by the world or being hated by your own children? Harry reveals one particular moment that haunts him still. A simple family dinner. He looked across the table at Meghan, who was scrolling through headlines on her phone. She smirked at one particularly negative article about William. She looked victorious. Harry, though, felt nauseous. That's my brother, he thought. My only brother. And in that moment, regret hit him like a tidal wave. Yet, he didn't say it. He didn't confront her. Not then, because regret alone wasn't enough to break the cycle. He still hoped it could be fixed. He still believed love might outweigh the damage. But as the years passed, regret grew heavier, and the consequences piled higher. Isolation from family, public humiliation, tension in marriage, exhaustion from the endless fight. Harry began to see what Meghan had given him wasn't freedom, it was a cage. A cage of exposure, resentment, and never-ending warfare. Isn't it ironic? Harry fled the palace because he felt trapped. But the life he entered was just another prison, this time built from interviews, memoirs, and scandals. And so, regret became more than a feeling. It became a turning point, a seed of realization that something had to change, that his life, his marriage, his sanity couldn't survive under the weight of Meghan's revenge agenda. But what, exactly, would push him from regret into action? What would turn quiet sorrow into the decision to end his marriage? Harry admits it was a single, explosive moment, a breaking point where he could no longer deny the truth. And that breaking point would not only shock Meghan, it would change the course of royal history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It always comes down to a moment, a single, irreversible flash where everything you've been denying suddenly collapses, and you can't unsee the truth. For Harry, that breaking point was brutal. It wasn't quiet, it wasn't gradual, it was explosive. And once it happened, there was no going back. Harry describes it as one of the worst nights of his life. A fight, not the usual simmering disagreements or tense silences, but a full-blown eruption. Voices raised, accusations hurled, the kind of argument that shakes the walls and leaves children crying in the next room. And in that chaos, Harry finally saw Meghan, not as the wife he had vowed to protect, but as the architect of his downfall. He recalls shouting words he never thought he'd say. "You used me." The phrase hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Meghan, he says, didn't deny it. She turned it back on him. "You let me." And in that retort, sharp and cold, Harry's world shattered. Because she was right. Think of the devastation in that realization. To know you weren't just betrayed, you were complicit. That every time you spoke against your family, every time you revealed secrets, every time you pulled the trigger of the revenge weapon, it wasn't just her hand guiding yours. It was your hand too. You chose blindness. You chose loyalty to someone who saw you not as a husband, but as a tool. But that night, the mask slipped further. Harry says Meghan's rage revealed the truth he had been afraid to face. She didn't regret the chaos. She relished it. Every scandal, every headline, every rift, it was proof that she was winning. Revenge, to her, wasn't collateral damage. It was the goal. And Harry, at 41, realized he had been her instrument all along. The fight escalated. Harry recalls throwing down the words he had bottled up for years. This isn't love. This is war. Meghan, he claims, sneered at him. War is the only way they listen. Those words, sharp as daggers, seared into his memory. It was the moment he knew their marriage wasn't about building a life together. It was about destroying lives apart. Can you imagine the horror of realizing your love story was really a battlefield? That every tender moment, every shared vow, every smile for the cameras was camouflage for an agenda? Harry describes feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath him, a free fall into betrayal. But here's the part that haunts him most. He says he saw his children's faces that night, innocent, wide-eyed, caught in the crossfire of their parents' rage. Archie asking, "Why are you shouting?" Little Lilibet clinging to a nanny. And in that instant, Harry says, regret transformed into resolve. He couldn't let them grow up in a war zone. He couldn't let them be pawns like he had been. He had to stop the cycle. The breaking point wasn't just about Meghan. It was about Harry realizing his silence had made him an accomplice, and his children would be the next casualties if he didn't act. That night, Harry says he made the choice. He would end the marriage. Not because he stopped loving Meghan. Part of him still did, but because love that destroys everything around it isn't love at all. Ask yourself, how much does it take for a man who once gave up his family, his home, his crown for a woman to finally walk away? It takes everything. It takes heartbreak, humiliation, betrayal. And it takes the unbearable realization that the person you trusted most was the very one dismantling your life piece by piece. The breaking point was Harry's awakening. The night he stopped being the weapon and started being the man who refused to be used any longer. But breaking free wasn't simple. Divorce wasn't just a personal choice. It was a declaration of war in itself. The palace, the press, Meghan's camp, the children, it all hung in the balance. Harry's choice would trigger shockwaves across the globe. And what happened after that breaking point wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a brutal new chapter, where Harry would discover the deepest betrayal of all. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the entire foundation of your marriage was never about love. That the laughter, the vows, the whispered promises weren't sacred, they were strategy. That is exactly what Harry now confesses hit him like a tidal wave after the breaking point. He describes it with raw honesty. I thought I was loved, but I was used. Those words aren't just dramatic. They're devastating, because they cut through the fairy tale image the world once celebrated and exposed the chilling reality behind it. Harry wasn't cherished as a husband. He was harnessed as a weapon. Let's pause on that. Love is supposed to heal, protect, and bind. But what Harry realized was that his marriage had done the opposite. It isolated him from his brother. It severed his bond with his father. It placed him at odds with the very institution his mother gave her life defending. It destroyed his public image. It left him hollow. Is that love? Or is that manipulation wrapped in affection? Harry admits that once the truth dawned, he began to look back at every detail with new eyes. The wedding, was it about commitment or about spectacle? The interviews, were they about honesty or about ammunition? The memoir, was it therapy or was it propaganda? Each memory, once cherished, now felt like evidence. Evidence of a plan. Evidence that he had been less of a partner and more of a pawn. And here's the cruelest part. Harry admits Meghan's affection always seemed strongest when he was fighting his family. When he stood up against William, she praised him. When he criticized Charles, she reassured him. When he went on camera and exposed the monarchy, she embraced him. But when he sought peace, when he longed for reconciliation, when he dreamed aloud of mending fences, her warmth cooled. Isn't that telling? Affection as reward, silence as punishment. Can you imagine how lonely that must have felt? To realize the person you love only loves you fully when you're at war with your blood? That every hug, every kiss, every whispered, "I believe in you," wasn't unconditional. It was conditional on you serving her cause. Harry confesses that this realization broke him. Not because he stopped loving Meghan, but because he finally saw that the love wasn't mutual. He loved her for who she was. She loved him for what he could do. That's not romance, it's utility. That's not devotion, it's exploitation. And here's where the audience must ask themselves, how many of us would have noticed sooner? Would you, in Harry's place, blinded by grief, desperate for affection, recognize the manipulation? Or would you, like him, convince yourself it was real? But the damage was already done. Harry's relationships were shattered, his reputation in tatters, his children growing up without connection to their royal bloodline. And all of it, he now admits, served not love, but revenge. The loneliness of that realization, Harry says, is almost unbearable. Nights spent awake, staring at the ceiling, asking himself, did she ever truly love me? He admits he doesn't know the answer. Maybe in her own way, she did. Or maybe she only loved the power he represented, the status, the headlines, the weapon he became in her war. And yet, he says the cruelest betrayal wasn't even Meghan's agenda. It was the fact that he let it happen, that he silenced his instincts, that he ignored his brother's warnings, that he dismissed his father's pleas, that he chose blindness over honesty. That is the weight he carries now. But Harry also admits one more thing. The cost of being used isn't just borne by him. His children, Archie and Lilibet, are now part of the collateral. Their futures, their identities, their ties to the crown, all fractured by choices they didn't make. And that, he says, is the deepest guilt of all. Because being used as a weapon is one thing, but realizing your children were pulled into the same war, that's something else entirely. And so, Harry confesses, his next step wasn't just about freeing himself. It was about protecting his children. From Meghan, from the monarchy, from the cycle of revenge that had already claimed his life. But that step, the recognition of the collateral damage, would bring even more pain. Because the cost of Meghan's revenge wasn't limited to Harry. It rippled outward, hitting innocent lives, and leaving scars that might never heal. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Collateral damage. That's what Harry calls it now. The unspoken casualties of a war he never truly chose, but fought in all the same. And when he looks at the wreckage, the faces that haunt him most aren't those of Charles or William. They're smaller, softer, innocent. Archie and Lilibet, his children. Because for all the headlines about Meghan and Harry, the real victims, Harry admits, are the ones who never asked to be part of this war. Two children who should have been raised in love, not politics. Who should have grown up with a family, not a fractured dynasty. And Harry now confesses that every move Meghan pushed him to make, every interview, every memoir, every scorched earth revelation, wasn't just hurting his father, his brother, his grandmother's legacy. It was hurting his children's future. Think about it. Archie and Lilibet, born into history, could have been embraced as symbols of a new, modern monarchy. Instead, their lives are shrouded in controversy, their titles debated, their very identities politicized, not because of who they are, but because of the war their parents waged. And Harry, in his darkest moments, admits he wonders if he traded their birthright for Meghan's revenge. Can you imagine that guilt? A father realizing he didn't just sacrifice himself, he sacrificed his children. It wasn't just titles. It was connections. Harry recalls birthdays where Archie asked about Grandpa Charles, or why they never saw Uncle William's children. Questions he didn't know how to answer. Because how do you explain to a child that their mother and father chose a war that left them without cousins, without grandparents, without an extended family? And the pain wasn't only emotional. Harry admits the practical consequences were brutal. Estrangement meant fewer security guarantees. Financial independence became financial strain. The lifestyle Meghan demanded came at a cost, and it wasn't just Harry paying the price. Their children were now growing up without the protections and privileges that had safeguarded generations of Windsors. But Archie and Lilibet weren't the only collateral. Harry's friends, those who once stood by him in the army, those who cheered for him at Invictus, those who knew him as more than a prince, drifted away. Not because they stopped caring, but because they couldn't stomach being dragged into Meghan's strategy. One by one, Harry watched his circle shrink. Some tried to warn him, others simply left. And now, years later, Harry realizes he's lonelier than he's ever been. Even Meghan's allies weren't immune. Remember Jessica Mulroney, once Meghan's closest friend? Distance. Heather Dorick, her Pilates confidant? Silence. Hollywood figures who once embraced them began to back away. wary of being tied to a couple who seemed to turn every relationship into another battlefield. The revenge agenda left scorched earth everywhere it touched. But the deepest collateral, Harry admits, was his mother's legacy. Diana's memory, once sacred, was used so often in their war that it became diluted, politicized, twisted. What should have been a private, cherished connection between mother and son became another weapon brandished in public. And Harry confesses that every time Diana's name was used to justify another attack, another revelation, he felt a piece of her slip further away from him. Isn't that the cruelest tragedy? To lose your mother once to death, and then again to exploitation? And yet, the collateral damage wasn't just personal. It was institutional. Harry's war, fueled by Meghan's agenda, shook public trust in the monarchy. For a time, it looked like the crown itself might falter under the weight of scandal. But the monarchy survived. It always does. The only one left truly broken was Harry. And his children. This is where Harry's confession turns rawest. He admits he lies awake at night, wondering what Archie and Lilibet will think when they're older. When they read Spare. When they watch the Oprah interview. When they see clips of their father tearing down his own family. Will they see a man fighting for truth? Or will they see what Harry now sees? A man being used, manipulated, turned into a weapon? And the question that keeps him awake, will they forgive him? But Harry also admits this realization became the final push. He could endure being mocked. He could endure being estranged. He could endure being discarded. But he couldn't endure watching his children pay the price for Meghan's revenge. The cycle had to stop. And that meant only one thing: divorce. Yet deciding to end the marriage didn't mean the war was over. Because the moment Harry chose to walk away, the pressure didn't ease, it intensified. The royal family, Meghan's camp, the press, all waited for his next move. And with every eye on him, Harry realized he had walked out of one battlefield and directly into another. Because what came next wasn't just divorce papers. It was the crown itself applying pressure. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For a Windsor, nothing is ever private. Divorce isn't just about lawyers, custody, and property. It's about history, politics, and survival. And when Harry made the decision to end his marriage, he quickly discovered the monarchy wasn't going to stand idly by. The pressure came swiftly, silently, and with the weight of centuries behind it. Harry recalls the first signs. Subtle messages. Old friends from the palace reaching out. Courtiers framing divorce not just as a personal choice, but as a constitutional matter. You're still the king's son, one told him. Your decisions reflect on the crown. But Harry says he knew what that really meant. You are still our problem. Behind palace doors, King Charles was reportedly torn. On one hand, he wanted to protect his son. On the other, he feared the monarchy couldn't withstand another public implosion. Divorce would mean scandal. Scandal would mean headlines. And headlines would mean questions about the institution, about succession, about legitimacy. William, Harry admits, was less conflicted. The bond between the brothers was already in tatters, but William saw Harry's marriage as a ticking time bomb. Divorce, for him, wasn't just inevitable, it was necessary. A way to draw a line between the firm and the chaos Meghan had created. Cut ties cleanly. Harry recalls his brother's message being relayed. Or you'll destroy us all. The irony, of course, was that Harry agreed. Divorce was necessary. But what neither brother could stomach was the cost. The press would feast. Hollywood would spin. Meghan would fight back. And the monarchy, though it would endure, would emerge bloodied. Here's where the pressure became suffocating. Harry admits that once the news began to leak inside palace walls, he was treated less like a son and more like a liability. Calls became strategic, not supportive. Every conversation seemed rehearsed. Every gesture felt conditional. The message was clear. If you divorce Meghan, do it quietly. Do it quickly. And do it in a way that shields the crown first, your children second, and you last. But how do you quietly divorce Meghan Markle? The woman whose brand thrives on noise. The woman who turned every silence into an accusation, every glance into a headline? Harry knew the palace was asking for the impossible. And Meghan? She didn't go quietly either. Harry recalls late-night arguments where she accused him of betrayal. After everything I gave up for you, she allegedly spat, you'd run back to them? For Meghan, divorce wasn't just a marriage ending. It was her revenge slipping away. Without Harry, She wasn't the woman who conquered the crown. She was just another ex-wife. And that terrified her. The palace, meanwhile, began preparing its defenses. Lawyers drafted statements. Advisors spun narratives. Some even floated the idea of stripping titles altogether, severing the Sussex brand permanently from the crown. Harry admits he felt trapped between two war rooms, his wife's on one side, his family's on the other, both using him as a pawn, both demanding loyalty, and all he wanted was peace. Ask yourself, what would you do if every choice you made meant betraying someone? Stay with Meghan and betray your family. Divorce Meghan and betray your wife. Fight for your children and risk losing them to custody battles. Stay silent and watch your reputation rot. Speak out and watch the monarchy burn. There was no good choice, only survival. Harry confesses this was the darkest period. He felt pressure from the palace to save the monarchy, pressure from Meghan to save her revenge, pressure from the world to finally take a stand. And in the middle, he was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, he admits. Every decision felt like a noose. But then came the ultimatum. Harry says the palace delivered it with icy precision. Choose your family, or lose them forever. It wasn't about Meghan. It wasn't about tea.